Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Games. In today's video, we're going to go ahead and start animating our character so it looks like he's actually moving around. Right now, when we hit the play button, we have the ability to move forward, backwards, left, and right, and we can look around with our character. So now we need to go ahead and actually get our character to look like he's moving himself around. So to begin with, I'm going to go into the Anim Starter Pack folder. And there's a couple of extra files in here we don't need. So there is a character, the UE4 ASP character, and the Hero TPP Anim Blueprint. I'm going to select these. I'm going to hit delete. And we're going to hit the delete button to get rid of them. We're not going to use them. I'm going to get rid of the showcase map as well. And then finally, there's a blend space crouched walk and a blend space jog. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those as well. So that's just going to leave us with the animations, and it's going to leave us with a UE4 mannequin folder. So in order to progress with our animations, we have to think about what we want to actually do. And looking through the animations here, there are actually several different sets of animations that we can use. The first and the foremost is going to be the standing animations when he's walking around. Now there is a walk forward or a walk with the rifle at the iron sights here, and we're going to be using that to aim with our weapon. There's also what the designers named the file the jog animations, and the jog animations are going to have the weapon at the hip fire position. So we're going to make a state machine where we're going to have to figure out what the character does when he's not moving, and then when he moves forward and when he moves around while aiming. There's also a set of crouching animations as well, so we can walk around with the character in the crouch position, and we can do that with him at the hip fire position as well as with the iron sight position. So we're going to want to go ahead and integrate that as well. So today we're just going to get started, and I am just going to get us rolling on this as fast as possible. So I'm going to add in a new folder into our Anim Starter Pack, and I'm going to right click, we're going to click on New Folder, and I'm going to call this folder Blend Spaces. And we're going to get into what exactly a blend space is. But first, I am going to go ahead and in our characters folder, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to have our blueprint TPS player character. And I'm going to open that up. Now inside of our character here, if we click on where our mesh is, over to the right under animation, there is an animation mode for using animation blueprint, an asset, or a custom mode. We want to use the animation blueprint. And then there's an anim class underneath that we can select and use that will animate the character. And basically, we're going to have to create a file that's going to drive the animations on our character. So I'm going to go back to our main window. And right next to where our player character is, I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to go to animation, and we're going to create an animation blueprint. Now it's going to have an option at the top for a parent class. We don't need a parent class. And down below, there's going to be a selection for the skeleton, and we want to use the appropriate skeleton for our character. In this case, we're using the mannequin, so I'm going to select that UE4 mannequin skeleton and hit OK. And then we'll be able to name it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this our AnimBP underscore TPS underscore player. So this blueprint is basically going to handle what animations are played on our character at a given time. So I'm going to double click and open it up. And I'm going to drag this into our main tab viewer up top. And it's going to start us off in maybe a different screen than this. But we have the AnimBP in our final animation pose right here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to end up plugging something in here, and this is going to drive what animation is currently playing on the character at a given time. And this is all within the Anim Graph tab at the top. Now, there's also an event graph at the top, and there's already an event in here that is the event blueprint update animation. And this basically fires every frame, and it does any kind of logic or pulling any information that we need in order to update the animation appropriately. So for now, I'm just going to go over to the AnimGraph tab right here, and we're going to have to create a state machine to plug into our final animation pose. And a state machine is going to have a series of states that the character can be in, and it's going to play an animation based on what state the character currently is in. So we're going to go right click on our graph, and I'm going to search for state machine, and we're going to find add new state machine. So I'm going to select that, and we can go ahead and rename the state machine right here. I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to call this locomotion. That's generally what most of them call. Now you can have multiple state machines going into your final animation pose. So if you have something complex like, say there's a character and he has a melee weapon like a sword, you can have a state machine for the sword animations, and then say you have a ranged weapon of some sort like a bow and arrow or a crossbow or something. You can have a separate state machine that has separate animation states for having a crossbow or some other equipment equipped. But for our purposes, a single state machine is going to work just fine for what we need. And I'm just going to take the pin from the locomotion and plug this directly into the final animation pose. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click on the locomotion state machine. So this is going to bring us into the graph for the state machine. And you're going to notice here that there's an entry point. And the entry point is going to be where our character, when he begins play, is going to come into here. And it's going to lead us to our first animation in the tree. So when this blueprint starts, it comes in through this entry point. Now, when we come in from the entry point, we're going to assume that no buttons are being hit and the character is just in his idle state. So over to the right here, inside of the asset browser, I'm going to search for the idle. And we're going to see in there that we have in several idle animations. Particularly, I'm going to select the idle rifle hip. I'm going to drag this out, and I'm going to call this idle _ standing. And so this is going to handle the idle when the character is in the standing position and standing still and not doing anything. And we're going to drag from our entry point over to the ring around the idle standing state. And then we can actually double click on the idle standing, and you'll see here it has an animation that's plugged directly into the final animation pose. So if we go ahead and hit compile and save, you're going to see in our preview to the left here, our character is idling with his rifle at his hip. So that's working out pretty good. And if we hit the play button, we don't see any activity yet because we have to tell the character to use this anim blueprint. So back in our character blueprint, with the mesh selected in the components tab, and then over to the right under animation in anim class, we're going to find the AnimBP _TPS _player that we just created. So we're going to go ahead and select that and compile and save. And if we hit play, you'll now see that the character is in an idling state, but he still doesn't do anything if we end up moving around. So in order to handle multi-directional input and the character walking around in different directions, we're going to go back to our Anim Starter Pack, and inside of the Blend Spaces folder, we're going to create our first blend space. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click and go to Animation and select Blend Space. Now there's two types of blend spaces in here. There's a blend space and there's a blend space 1D. 1D is basically an animation that is manipulated based off of one variable. It's basically a single plane graph, so it can move between states along this graph in one dimension. And a blend space without the 1D, the standard blend space, is a two-dimensional graph, so you can have two inputs leading in that is going to affect the animation that's being played. Now, since we want to handle both forward, backward, left, and right, that's two different axes that we're going to have to handle movement across. So we're going to use the regular blend space. And it's going to ask us to pick a skeleton for this. So we're going to select that UE4 mannequin, and then we're going to be able to name it. So I'm going to call this our BS underscore TPS underscore. And at this point, we're going to have to identify what this blend space is doing. And since our first state is going to be our idling, or not our idling, but it's going to be our walking around with the rifle at the hip, I'm going to call this walk hip. So this graph is going to basically determine what happens when our character is walking and moving around while his weapon is at the hip position. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and double click on our new blend space, and we're going to get brought to a screen that looks kind of like this. And you're going to see down here at the bottom, we have a two-dimensional graph. So it has an axis that goes up and down and an axis that goes across. And we're going to have to plop animations into this graph in order to make it look like he's moving based on certain data. So over to the left here under axis settings, there's a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. And I'm going to click on the little arrows to drop these sections down. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug in some settings here. So for the horizontal axis, I'm going to call this direction. And this axis is going to go ahead and base the animation. It's going to take the input of which direction the character is moving in and apply a movement based on that direction. So if the character is moving left, right, or forward or backwards, that's what this direction axis is going to handle. And then for the minimum axis value, I'm going to put in negative 180. And the maximum axis, I'm going to put it to positive 180. And so this way, it's going to complete a full 300-degree circle. Essentially, directly in front of the character is going to be 0 degrees. To the left is going to be a negative 90, and to the right is going to be a positive 90. And we have to bring it all the way to a close behind the character at the 180-degree mark. For the number of grid divisions, 4 is going to be perfectly fine for our needs. I'm going to set this interpolation time here to 0.2. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to add a little bit of blend time between one animation to the next. So it's not going to look as abrupt if you change directions. Now for the second axis here, I'm going to call this axis speed. And this is going to be based on how fast the character is moving. So the vertical axis is going to handle from a stop position to a moving position. And the horizontal axis is going to handle in which direction our character is traveling based on where he's facing. So I'm going to go ahead and set the minimum axis value to 0 here. The maximum axis value is going to be set to 500. And I already did a little bit of legwork here on this ahead of time and tested out the animations to see at what speed the animations look good. And at 500 for this specific animation set looks good. You can definitely play around with the speed that the character travels at so that the animations look better to you. But it's going to take a little bit of experimenting on your part if you want to go ahead and do that. If you want to get something that's just quick and ready to go, this is going to do it for now. And then for the number of grid divisions, 4 is also going to be good. And for the interpolation time here, I'm going to set this to 0.2 as well. Now moving down a little bit here, in sample interpolation, there's a target weight interpolation. And there's a little bit more in there, speed per second. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to set this up a little bit. I'm going to set this to a value of 2. And this value of 2 is going to go ahead and once again add some blend space in there for us. It's a little bit different than the interpolation time. But basically it's going to set how fast it interprets from one state to a next. And then the interpolation times up top here determine over what course of time the interpolation takes place. So basically, when we change movement, it's going to take 0.2 seconds to make the change fully over, and it's going to do it at a rate of 2 between the two animations. And the one last thing I want to do here is in the animation notifies, there is a notify trigger mode. And I'm going to go ahead and select the highest weighted animation. Now what this is going to do is later when we add in footstep sounds, with a blend space like this, if you're blending multiple animations together, what's going to happen is if we put in an animation notify, so we want something to happen at a certain point in the animation, but we have multiple animations playing, this determines which animation we grab the notifies from. So say if you're moving at an off angle from center, so let's say 10 degrees to the right, you're going to be playing mostly the forward animation with some of the right animation blended in. And we don't want to play both the footsteps from the forward animation and the right animation, because that's going to create some weird sound effects, and you're going to get like double footprints, and it's going to double up on all of the notifies. So the highest weighted animation basically takes the animation that we're using the most of, and then uses the notifies from that animation alone. So we're starting at a position of 0 down here at the bottom of the graph. So this is going to be really easy. I'm just going to search for idle, and we're going to find where we have the idle rifle hip. And I'm just going to drag this down to the bottom left corner here. And then I'm going to place one all along these divisions at the bottom. So we're just going to keep dragging that idle rifle hip to the very bottom here. So when our character is stopped, he's going to be in the idle pose. And then we want to go ahead and search for the jog animations, because that's what the naming convention of whoever created the animations decided to call it. And we're going to look for the forward. So our center position here is 0 degrees. So for jogging forward, we want to drag that and place that at the very top of the graph up here. To the right of that, that's going to be our right. So I'm going to take our jog right and place it on that division to the right. And then finally, I'm going to take the jog backwards and place it at the very top right corner. Then we're going to kind of do the opposite the other way around. So over here at the animation point to the left, the 90-degree mark in our direction to the negative side, this is going to be to our left. So I'm going to grab the jog left and drag it to the top of the graph right there. And then again, we're going to take the jog backwards and go ahead and place this in the top left-hand corner. And if you want to preview what the animation is going to do, you can move your mouse over the graph here, and if you hold Shift and left click, you can move this little point around, and it's going to show you what exactly the character is going to do at different angles as you rotate this around. Now, the animations from the starter pack aren't perfect, and especially if you get to like weird coordinates like here, the animation kind of looks really weird, as well as I think there's another point right here where the animation just kind of doesn't look all that good. And there is a way to fix this, but I'm not going to actually go into that because we're going to use one of the most used tricks in gaming industry, and that's hiding what you don't want to fix. I mean, right now, this is not affecting gameplay at all. It's basically just an appearance thing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera up closer to the character so that we can't see his feet when they're hitting the ground. And basically that's just going to hide the fact that these weird animations are going on. And it's going to save us time as far as getting everything up and running. Now later down the line, if you want to fix it and you want to have a further back camera, okay, that makes sense. But for our purposes right now, we don't really need to fix it all that badly in order to get it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save at the top, and we can close out of our walk hip. And back here in our Anim blueprint, I'm going to go ahead and back out of our idle standing state right here. And we need to go ahead and transition into our blend space. So we're going to have to put this onto our graph. So I'm going to do to the right in the asset browser, search for the BS. And we're going to have our BS TPS walk hip. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this into the graph. And I'm going to call this our walking underscore standing. So this is going to be our animation state for when the character is moving and when he's standing upright. So we're going to have a separate state where the character is crouching and moving around while crouching, and we're going to handle that later. So we have this new state here, and we want to go ahead and, from the outer ring around idle standing, drag over to our walking standing. And this is going to create a transition so that we can move between the idle state and the walking standing. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab from the walking standing and drag it back to the idle standing. And this is going to give us a transition both ways. So we can move from the idle standing to the walking standing, and then back from the walking standing to the idle standing. Now we have to set up some rules as to how this takes place. And we're going to need some information from our player character in order to gain that. So I'm going to click on the tab for the event graph here, and we have our event blueprint update animation. Now we're going to need to use this to go ahead and try and get some information about our player. So I'm going to right click in the graph here, and I'm going to search for try get pawn owner. And what this function is going to do is it's going to try and get whatever the pawn is that is using this anim blueprint. And the first thing I want to do is drag off and search for is valid. And there is two is valid functions here. I want to use the one with the question mark. And what this is going to do is we want to make sure that whatever's controlling this, when we try to get the pawn owner, that something is in fact actually controlling this blueprint. So that way we don't end up with any kind of error message. The next thing we want to do is we want to figure out how fast our character is moving. So from our try get pawn owner, I'm going to go ahead and drag out, and we're going to get velocity. And this function is going to return a vector, and that vector is going to be the length of how fast our character is moving. So what we want to do is drag out here, and we want to figure out how long this vector actually is. So we're going to search for vector length. And there's an option for a vector length squared, but we just want the regular vector length. So that's going to give us a float value in return that is going to basically be how fast our character is moving. So we want to drag off from this vector length, and we're going to select the promote to variable, and we're going to create a new variable in our blueprint. And down here in the lower left, you're going to see where it says variables. We're going to go ahead and name this, and I'm just going to call this speed, because this is going to represent the speed of our character. So from our is valid, I'm going to go ahead and drag out from the is valid output and plug into the set speed. That is going to go ahead and plug into our blend space, and we're also going to use it to tell if our character is moving or not. And if you remember, on our blend space, we also created a direction input. So we need to go ahead and get the direction that the character is actually moving in. So what we're going to do is, from our set speed, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag out, and we're going to calculate direction. And so there's a nice built-in function that calculates a direction for us. We just need a target, which is going to be ourself. We're going to need a velocity here. And the velocity, we already got the velocity from our try get pawn owner over here. So I'm going to grab the return value from our get velocity and plug this into the velocity input on calculate direction. Finally, we're going to need a rotation. So I'm going to try get the pawn owner off of the return value there. I'm going to drag out, and we're going to search for get actor. Oop, that didn't work out well. So let's try that again. From our try get pawn owner here, I'm going to go ahead and drag out, and we're going to get actor rotation. And this function is going to provide us with the rotation of our character. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that into the base rotation there. And this is going to return a value in a float that is going to be the direction in degrees that our character is moving in. So from our return value here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag out, and we're going to promote this to a variable. And this is going to be direction. So we have a variable now that is going to tell us how fast we're moving. We have a variable that's going to tell us in what direction we're moving. So we can actually use these and employ them on our animation spaces. So if we go back into the locomotion tab over here in our anim graph, in order to transition from the standing idle to the standing walking here, we're going to click the arrow that is moving from standing to walking standing. And if we double click on it, it's going to go ahead and open up this graph here. And we have a result that is finalized in a Boolean here. So we need to find out a true or false value on whether we can transition from one state to another. So we want to transition over to the state when our character is moving. So I'm going to grab the speed variable, drag it onto our graph, and we'll use the get. And we want to get our speed, and we want to see if it is greater than a certain number. So I'm going to use the greater than float, and we can plug in a number here. We can use a low number here. So I'm just going to say 10. And we're going to plug the Boolean into the can enter transition. And that's going to be it. So basically, it's going to take this transition in our graph if our character is moving faster than 10. For the return value here, from going from walking standing back to idle standing, I'm going to double click on that transition rule. Once again, we're going to want to check our speed, so I'm going to drag it out into the graph and get it. And we're going to want to see if it is less than or equal to 10. So we'll just plug in the number 10 there, and we'll plug this into the result. So when we're in the idle standing position, we can go ahead and transition over to the walking standing position when our speed is greater than 10. And once we're in the walking standing position, we can transition back to the idle position when our speed drops below or equal to 10. And we're going to have to plug in those values to our blend space as well. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on our walking standing. And we have a direction and a speed input that we made on our graph. So I'm just going to simply drag out from our variables over here and drop the speed onto the speed input and drop the direction onto the direction input. And that's literally all we're going to need to do at this point. So now we have an input for direction and speed. So we're going to hit compile and save. And we're going to go ahead and hit play. And we should be able to walk our character around, and we're going to see that based on what direction we're moving compared to the character, he's going to go ahead and move around differently. So if I start walking forward, he's going to start moving forward. And if I stop moving forward, he stops in place, and he can walk left, he can walk right, he can walk backwards, and we can move our character around like this. So I'm going to escape to get out of there. And then one other thing I want to check to make sure is I'm going to go back into our character blueprint here, and I'm going to go to the character movement component. I'm going to select that. And over here, there's going to be a lot of options for how our character can move. The one I want to take a look at is going to be the max walk speed here. So initially, this is set to 600, and I want to go ahead and set this to 500. And this is going to dictate how fast our character can move when full movement is applied to the movement component. So when we use this input move forward or input move right, the scale value is going to scale based on the input. So we're getting an input that's between 0 and 1, and we're getting a maximum walk speed from our character component. So if we're moving half speed, we're going to get a value of 0.5 coming in from our axis value, and it's going to multiply 0.5 by the maximum walk speed. So our character, if we have the stick at half way on our controller, it's going to go ahead and it's only going to move 250 speed. So we'll go ahead and compile and save and just play to test it out again. And we can go ahead and move our character around. And like I said, the animations are going to look weird at certain angles. But basically, eventually, I'm just going to hide this by moving the camera closer and like right behind the character. So we're not even going to really be able to see his feet. But importantly, what the character or the player will be able to see about the character is that he's kind of moving around. So at this point, that's going to complete today's video. If you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and leave them down below. I'm also going to leave a link to my Facebook page down there, so if you want to follow me on Facebook and keep up with what's going on with me, I post some news over there sometimes. You can go ahead and click that link and like me over there. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.